Welcome, everyone, to the Ask Every Child webinar. Glad to have you with us today. We're going to be talking about why teachers should not quit the profession. Very important topic today. And I'm David Johnson. I'm the CEO of Miss Kendra Programs, and I'm here with my colleagues, which I'm very excited about joining today is Dr. Hadar Lubin, who's the Chief Medical Officer of the Miss Kendra Programs. And then Amy Barber from Minnesota, who is an art specialist and school social worker at St. Paul City Charter. Welcome, Amy. And we have Annie Morris, who's the clinical consultant and all-round Miss Kendra at the Sallie B. Howard School in Wilson, North Carolina. And Leslie Blatteau, who is a history teacher and recently has become the president of the Teachers Union in New Haven, Connecticut. Welcome, Leslie. And we're supported here by our webmaster, Katie Odell, who is going to be collecting your questions during the webinar. Please put those in the Q&A. After I give a little introduction, then the panel is going to have a conversation with each other about this important topic, and then we'll turn it over to questions from the audience. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'm just going to begin with a few comments about this issue. So why should teachers not quit the profession now? And why are we asking a question like that? Is the important thing, I guess. Well, I mean, the answer to the question we all know is that being a teacher is the most important job one could have in this country at this time. It's the determinant of the health of our future citizens. And even though it's taken a hit over the last couple of years in particular, it remains to be the same as it always has been, one of the essential functions of our society. And the last thing that we need at this time is for people to seek other jobs elsewhere. Why is this coming up? It's coming up because recent surveys of teachers have shown some alarming trends. A recent survey just this January, conducted by the NEA, or the National Education Association, showed that 90% of teachers are reporting that they feel burnt out. 55% have said that in the last year they've decided to leave the profession earlier than anticipated, and 25% say they're considering leaving at the end of this school year. A decade ago, for every job opening in teaching, there were 1.6 applicants. This year, there are 0.6, meaning that in all the jobs that are open, there are only almost half number available. 10 years ago, there were 10.6 million educators in this country. Today, there are only 10 million. That means there are 600,000 less educators today than there were 10 years ago. So the pandemic has appeared to be kind of the last straw for a number of people. And number of teachers. There's always been the pressure of teaching to the test, mental health problems of students, the intense demands of the administration, boards of ed, regulatory agencies on the nature of teaching, leading to a lack of autonomy sometimes, and at the same time being held responsible for the education of children and for problems such as the academic gap. However, these past 2 years, for too many people, the disruption in our patterns of behavior in schools and in the job and the profession of teaching, the disruptions, the remote, non-remote, mask, hybrid, and then upon the return this spring and this fall, this last fall, only to be finding that with Omicron, teachers are calling out sick. Students are still not all coming to school. The level of chaos and disruption has been astronomical. And we know from decades of research that when there are these kinds of systemic disruptions, changes in society, it's an opportunity for people to sort of just say to themselves, well, what am I doing? And I don't want to keep doing it. And so the disagreement over vaccinations and masks and the literally remote versus in-person learning, which had only exacerbated the discussions about the forms of education that we were having in America anyway, have led many teachers to say, you know, maybe this is a good time to move on. We know it's not about the money because these surveys are true in districts that where teachers are well paid, just as much as they are when the teachers are paid less than they should be. So if it's not about the money, certainly not about the kids, it's not about the pedagogy, you know, what is it about and what can we do about it? One thing that I'd like to highlight and then turn it over to our panel is that there have been a number of articles most recently about one of the things that has truly pushed people over the edge this year is that when people came back, too many teachers are not showing up for work because of COVID, because of their families, because of stress of the job, because of a kind of a new norm of attendance, not just for students, but also for teachers. And what this does is it leads to a lot of unpredictability about who is going to be at the school on any given day, leading in many cases to administrators covering classrooms, students being placed in libraries with computers and left alone for long periods of time because there is nobody there to teach them. And in schools throughout this country are reporting major problems with coverage. Even up to 10, 20% of teachers may not be present in a particular school on a particular day. What does this do? So it's one thing to have an external threat, to have a pandemic, to have bureaucracy, to have the government, to have the students' mental illness challenge your job. It's another thing for it to erode and invade the spirit of the team and the team's morale. We know from years of research with veterans, combat veterans, that the morale of the unit is the most important factor in protecting and buffering the stress experienced by the individual members. It was, for example, in World War II, when whole units went over together and came back together, there was much less PTSD than in Vietnam, where everyone was on their own 13-month tour. And we're seeing right now an erosion of the confidence and the team spirit among teachers because of this new norm of fragmentation in literally the coordination of the team. It creates some resentment. It creates a feeling that no regular work can get done. We're just basically trying to cover the base. And that all leads to a feeling of defeat. So I just want to point to this. This is only one factor, but it's a very important factor that we may need to step back from focusing on programs for children a little bit as we examine the teaching profession's morale. And we need to focus school by school and district by district on reestablishing the kind of commitment that the teachers have to each other and to the school, and reconstitute the team in the face of what the pandemic has done. Teacher unions, of course, now become critical in this factor because they are the representation of the teachers' interests, but also principals and school districts need to attend to this as well, assessing the state of it and correcting it. It is just not going to work for 5, 10, 15, 20% of teachers not to be at work each day. So I just want to finish with that. I think there are many more factors in this, and I'd like to open it up to our wonderful panel now to just say whatever they feel like they'd like to say about the topic. Why should teachers not quit?
I'll start, David. I mean, I think you shared some really sobering statistics that speak for themselves. I'm even taking note of them. Some of them I was familiar with and some are new to me. But I want to focus more on that last thing that you said for how teachers can get the message that we shouldn't quit. And I think that school by school rebuilding is going to be one of the most crucial tools for us as we, drag ourselves to the finish line this year. And I say that not in jest. I say that teachers are really feeling like we just have to make it, which we know is not the right scenario for success. But that's where we are. So we'll acknowledge that and validate that. But what can we do at a system level? At a union level, but most important at the building level, to bring people back together. I mean, all the disruptions that you were describing, one of them is we're back in person, but we're meeting on Zoom because Omicron is still so high. This was January, February. So even we're in person, but we're still all on screens, further alienating us from the work and from each other. But what can we do to come back together as the community in the buildings and kind of honor the social contract that we have in our buildings, and say, I'm committed, I'm going to stay another year. And what can we do to better support each other first? And then, of course, we're here for the kids. But if the analogy that everyone always hears, but it's apt here, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. So teachers can check in with each other first so that we will be ready come fall to stay, because that's what we're talking about today, and to be ready to handle the challenges that await us then. But I love this framing of the school by school rebuilding, because that's where the relationships are most tangible.
Yeah, I think, Leslie, you're raising a very important thing, which is really if we are to reconstruct and rebuild the sense of camaraderie among the various school members in any of the given schools, clearly it has to be very tailored to the specific school for obvious reasons. But it really leaves us with a question is really what is in the core of a teacher camaraderie? When you think about a combat squadron, you pretty much have a sense that really what become a protective shield to the individual soldier, as David said, is a sense that we're working in unison and we have each other's back. And the question is, if we will take this metaphor of the squadron for each school of teachers, of educators, what are the components of this really unity, having each other's back? I know that I have very close friends who are teachers, so I know that exists usually with the other teacher with whom you split maybe a couple of classes, but that is not sufficient to create that kind of shield that David is referring to. And it is helping the individual, no question, but it doesn't create that sense of buffering and camaraderie and morale and milieu, if you will. So I think it's a kind of a really relevant question. I'm not sure that I do have an answer for it, but I think it's important to really raise those big questions as we rebuild educational system, given the knowledge that we have that it's got completely deconstructed during the pandemic, and we're not after the pandemic yet. So during this pandemic, so really, what kind of visions people have that they will be translated to that kind of I have your back. I'm part of the squadron, a little bit more than a squadron, of course, but of the platoon. So, that's something that I'll be very interested in. I'm not a teacher, or an educator in a school building. So I'll be very interested to hear, those of you who do teach, what component is really important for that field for you.
I can speak on that. When I think about all the opportunities in the past that I've been given to get to know my staff members, they're always casual opportunities, and it always surprises me when I hear adults trying to reinvent the wheel for adults. I just always want to go back to thinking about what we would want for our students. We want to give them opportunities to have fun together and be silly together, and free moments to get to interact with each other. And I feel like that's the same for adults. When we it makes me laugh when we sit in staff development and we're all sitting in these uncomfortable chairs in an uncomfortable room, staring at a screen, listening to someone speak for 12 hours. Like, we wouldn't expect our students to be able to do that either. So I just always go back to thinking about, like, how would we foster these opportunities for our students? And I don't think it's any different for adults. We want time to be able to have fun together, and within the workday too, not something that's expected to be done as a forced happy hour or something like that. We want to be given time during the day to be able to interact with each other casually. And that's where all of my best work relationships have come from.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And, it's interesting to me how we are speaking of this today. And, we're talking about vision and play and what has happened. And I think when we all came back, I know I was, you're locked down. And when you're not locked down, it's like being at a stop sign or a stop light that stays a little bit too long. And then when the yellow comes, you're almost like inching into the road. And then when the green comes on, more than likely, you're probably going to go faster than you normally would had you not taken that moment to maybe calm yourself down while you were at the stoplight. And this thing that has happened to us, I do believe that we greatly underestimated the impact it had on our relationships and our connectivity to one another. And though we are even here on Zoom without the mask and we can see each other's face and expressions, there is still something that is lacking in the humanness if we were, say, in the same room together. That energy where teaching really happens is really within that human context of the taught and the teacher. And so that's where teaching happens. And when we came back with this I guess, expectation that we're going to go back to norm, of course, that's not going to happen. And underestimating what we had to face in terms of, I know with the teachers, not only are they facing their work life, but they had to do something about their families. They had to come back to an administration that had to pivot in terms of how to teach, back to new rules, new norms, and almost like to an environment where how do I keep myself safe, because I still got to go home and keep my family at home safe. This is on top of all the loss that we had in terms of family members dying, friends dying, and all of that is a great grief that we didn't get to, in our normal way, share with one another. I know in our culture, when someone passes, one of the ways that we heal with one another is to have a wait, and you come and you sit and you talk and you share and you eat. And we didn't have any of that. So there was not even a way to properly grieve what we had lost. So now we're back into the school environment, and we're trying to pivot, and we are ill prepared to do so. And those mental health needs then that were created as a result of the impact of this disconnect and lack of relationship became even more, I think, pronounced at school because you want to do something. But I know even with myself going back, and we had all the safeguards and everything, there was still a little bit of nervousness. And I'm not that type, I want to be out, but there was a little bit of apprehension. It's like, I don't want to get too close. I want to stay in the back of the group. And even when the first time I got up to speak, I felt out of breath. I never felt panic before until that happened. And then I began to reassess what really is going on here. And I began to look at the faces, and really it's still a little bit difficult to connect with people with this part of your face covered up.
Yeah, actually,
you
Annie,
connect a lot with your eyes and with your heart, but this kind of sends the message for the connection that we lost.
you know what you're saying. I'm wondering, and let me just ask everyone, sometimes, when something moves to a breaking point, that's a moment when actual real change can happen. And I'm wondering if, because prior to the pandemic, we were in a situation of increased pressure on schools to increase the performance of kids and to make more efficient the educational task, and push and push and push. And my question is, has the pandemic made that just so impossible and made it people realizing, teachers and everyone realizing, that the socio-emotional needs, the mental health needs of the entire system have to come first, and that some significant changes might come as a result of this crisis that we're facing? Is that possible?
I think that we are being forced to see what we intuitively probably know for a long time, which is, even though you go to school as a teacher in that particular role, you bring the rest of you to the school, very much like the student who comes to the school as a student, but bring the rest of their life experience with them. And I think that the pandemic kind of forced us to really reevaluate, are we really interacting with one another, either among ourselves as educators and in between the students and us, in a way that is really based on human principles, and or just on the level of the role that we play, and that, which is extremely narrow. And the pandemic really forced us to have that need, because we all, as you said, Annie, in one hand, so yearning for the human connection. And then when we are close, we have this apprehension. And this is a very new thing, because before that, we wouldn't even pause to think about it, for good or bad. Yes. And I think this is, I would like to think it in a more positive way. In some ways, even this kind of attrition that we hear from school, from teachers, and these horrible statistics, maybe it's the kind of the ringing of the bell of, hey guys, you got to rearrange it, because you're about to lose really a very important place, which we call school. And the school is not only for education, the school is really to allow these kids to grow to become citizens and full-fledged human beings and adults, and they spend most of the time with educators. So I think it really forces that agenda in our face, if we will, and we must attend to it. I don't think that there is a choice. So this I view very positively, even though it's coming with a lot of alarm signs.
What are the rest
Absolutely.
of you? Yeah, Leslie.
I feel like there are some very strong forces at play who have the ears of legislators and policymakers who stand to profit off of a narrative that our schools are failing. And I feel like we have to name that here, because if we don't do what David and what Annie and Amy are saying, which is center the human need and the human emotion in these very human spaces, and just pretend like everything's normal, we'll continue to see the results that we've seen, which is a narrow deficit measure of our students, right? So, and some powers that be are happy to see that narrative play out, sadly. And I think but the good news is we know what to do. We know that we can create spaces where people feel agency and people feel supported, and that we honor the needs of our students and of the adults who are there to support students. So I think, we don't have to continue with the obsession over learning loss and the supposed need to accelerate when we're in control of our standards. And maybe our standards right now are human-based standards, where we are actually meeting the social emotional needs of the people who are in our spaces. And let's all be clear here. We know that social emotional is not an add-on. It's not a one-day thing. It's not something that teachers can do for 10 minutes. And I think that's how it's being treated, and it's being undermined. So then people aren't going to believe in it. But if we can do it right, which means it's infused in the design of our schools, then it will work. And then we will actually see student learning improve because we doubled down and infused it in everything that we do. But if people want schools to fail, they know how to make schools fail. And I think the wisdom here can be centered to say, we know what we can do to create spaces where schools can thrive. And just to the point of what the squadron needs, because I'll speak specifically from a very realistic perspective as a union leader, like we operate with a contract. And a contract doesn't have to be something that's a liability for student learning. A contract can be something that people agree on because it's good for everybody. And like, let's honor a contract so that when we do come together for meeting time, teachers are actually empowered to make decisions that will benefit their school community, versus what we often feel is that we're being told to do things by people above us. And we give up agency. We don't feel like it works because we know it's not the right thing. And then again, that morale downward spiral. But if we used our contractual meeting time to say, come, we want to hear from you. And there was a glimmer of it in last spring when we were asked, how do you want to spend the COVID money that we're going to get? And teachers said, yes, all right, there's hope, outdoor classrooms, field trips, tech support, all these things. And then red tape and bureaucracy gets in the way. So like, let's look to the research that we know of what high quality community schools need. And it's there for us. Follow it and give people the space to really tune into, again, back to that actual building where they work. And we will see the results. We really will.
Yes, and I think, those kind of creative initiatives really, really count. It speaks to, Amy, what you were telling us yesterday about what your administration did this winter to allow teachers to do something creative. You want to just fill us in on that? Because that was really cool.
Yeah, can I make a quick point first?
Oh yeah, of
Because
course.
you're talking about social emotional learning, and I just want to say that it's kind of a disservice to think that it's something that should only be taught in schools, because it's a life skill. Adults need it too, and so it should be embedded in our curriculum. It shouldn't be an extra thing. It's something that we all need to practice, and I wanted to highlight that too. But yeah, so the Winter Remember project is something that our admin initiated this winter, and it's sort of turned into a longer term project. But basically, they took some of our funds and gave each classroom teacher $500 to use as they desired. They could imagine their perfect classroom situation would look like, with the budget of $500, and then kind of have this agency to turn their classroom or do a fun unit, or, kind of put academics aside for a minute and really return to student interest and teacher interest, which I think goes a lot to say for that the teacher morale piece. You know, we all feel our best when we feel a sense of mastery and when we feel confident in what we're doing. And I think, David, you spoke earlier about the unpredictability of the day getting to a lot of us teachers. And so this was one small way that our admin said, okay, let's like put all that aside. You know, you can really focus on what your strengths are, what do you shine at as a teacher, and what do you want to highlight in your classroom. And here's a little budget for you to be able to do that with your students and really go back to focusing on community and what your interests are within your classroom in your own unique little environment there. So
Very
yeah.
cool.
Mhm.
All right, shall we turn it over to the audience? Katie, why don't you throw out a question from the audience for the panel to chew on?
Absolutely. So jumping right off of what Amy was speaking of, perhaps maybe absent that institutional support, how can I, as a teacher, it's a question from the audience, how can I express my creativity when I feel stifled by things like curriculum requirements?
I mean, I think this is a huge issue. Schools are institutions. They are one of the few social institutions left that are helping guide, develop, organize society. There's been an unfortunate reduction in the strength of the church, clubs like 4-H and Boy Scouts, these kinds of Girl Scouts, other kind of institutions where people can go as children increasingly are relying on the mass media to be their community center, to be their club. And it's eroding, and the result is the school is kind of our last bastion of organization, but unfortunately, it becomes too much is being processed in one place because you've got legal issues, you've got the fact that it's connected to local politics, the Board of Ed, this kind of a thing. This is not just this is not a one-room schoolhouse with a charming teacher. This is an institution. Principals get moved, teachers get moved from one school to another, sometimes like days before school opens. It's become institutionalized. And so therefore, institutions are rarely supportive of true creativity because too much creativity creates too much degrees of freedom that then you can't manage. So typically institutions will allow one day of some creative thing or very compartmentalized moments where the teacher can be creative, but that's not working. So we're up against something that something's got to break. And so maybe there's an opportunity here for really more creative thinking about how do we, as Amy and others were saying, attend to the socio-emotional needs of everyone in the building and integrate that into what a school day is about. Not just to have a 15-minute socio-emotional module. How can we integrate it so that the whole day is more integrated with the academics, the sports, the fun part, and all of this for everyone in ways that are going to be growth enhancing? And I think that's really a big challenge because of all the different stakeholders and pressures on the school. Everyone's got an attitude about schools. Everyone, even people who have nothing to do with schools, all have opinions about schools. And so I think it's, for superintendents, it's a huge problem because superintendents are, hey, be creative, do something different. You've got the power. The moment a superintendent does something a little off, the Board of Ed is on them. And there are many, the average length of stay for a superintendent is 3 years. That's as long as they last typically, except in New Haven. Though, because we had a superintendent for 20 years, but it's very short. So it's not conducive to out of the box thinking. So, I mean, I don't know what people think about that, but
Yeah.
it's a real issue, I think.
Yeah, that thing about integration, I think is so important. And this opportunity that the pandemic has given us, of course, we've been in it 2 years now. Now we're back in school and we're trying to adjust. But this kind of change that we're talking about in schools, as far as like Amy, I see that you do art. We're a school of arts and science. And so to integrate arts and all the gifts and talents, not just what the children bring, but what the teachers bring too. And I think integration is a very important part of it. But then for the community, the parents, the community to understand how social emotional learning and how important play, art, music, dance, how important that is to learning, and that we really are not able to learn as well when we're stressed, and when we don't have morale, and when we're tired, and when we just don't feel like it. It is that art, the music, the social emotional stability that opens up our capacity to learn more. And having that understanding, I think, helps us to welcome the recess that we took out, the art that we removed, the music that we took from the kids, thinking that somehow that's going to increase time for academics. It may have increased the time, but the accessibility for the kids to really be able to learn and to live and to be human and to play and to learn how to get along with one another somehow gets lost. And so we're talking about a shift in culture. And of course, that doesn't happen overnight, but I think this is a good opportunity for us to start building on that, so that, and start talking about it to our community and to our families, so that we can, I would say, informatively or educationally let the board, the county commissioners, and the people who make the rules and policies and regulations know how important this is, so they begin to integrate and begin to fund some of the things that we know are going to assist and help our children move to more academic excellence by walking into their own human greatness.
Well said.
I agree with you. I think one of the things you said is it's not going to happen overnight. And in my head, when you first read this question, I know that one of the barriers is when teachers are trying to be creative, that's that free time is when there's like social challenges happening within their classroom, because their students haven't been together for almost 2 years. And so I think we can really learn a lot from our like early childhood educators and our kindergarten teachers. Like, this is second nature to them. They're getting children that haven't had to be in a community before, and that's their job, is to teach them how to interact with each other. So once most of us educators that are used to working with older children, like, we get them with that skill set and we take it for granted, I think. And so a lot of our best practices already have opportunities for play and things like that embedded in them, and creativity. I think it just feels more challenging because us trying to implement it this year and go back to our normal has been challenging because of those social situations. So what's helped me in the art room is to just like keep that in mind, and remember to like take it slow, have patience with my students. And there are going to be moments when I have to stop my middle school classes and say, well, this is how we interact with each other, and sort of do some role play, reteach them those social skills that they learned way back in kindergarten that they've forgotten because they haven't had to interact with their peers for so long. So having that patience and that lens that, those social skills have been missing for a little bit.
I love hearing.
Yeah.
I love hearing the celebration of the arts as an integral part of learning, and the honoring of early childhood educators as the folks who we have so much to learn from. My answer, I think it's important. It's not nearly as insightful as those two, but it's much more concrete for how the question was phrased, which is, how can teachers feel more creative under the constraints of a very demanding system? And I think sometimes we're taught to survive, that we go in our classroom and we close our door and we do what we got to do. And I would just say that some of your most kind of creative rushes are going to come when you open your door and invite a colleague in, or when you go visit another colleague, or when you find each other and scarf down your lunch together and just try, run this idea by them and find out if you're crazy and brilliant or crazy and shouldn't try it. But just those opportunities to have those conversations. And this is what really zapped me doing the remote teaching, was that isolation. So we are back. Like, let's really double down on the fact that we are back and open our doors, literally and figuratively, because those moments of conversation that aren't part of the staff meeting, those opportunities to watch each other and plan together are where just the natural energy of the creative nature of our work will emerge. And I implore teachers to remind yourselves that you are not alone in this work, and you must find your people in your building, because they are going to be crucial to your ongoing success and just your ongoing feelings of efficacy that we know are part of this work.
That's a wonderful metaphor, the opening your doors. I mean, I think that's terrific. Hadar, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say that all of the observation that we hear about teachers making, that the kids really lost their gained knowledge of interaction and how to be with people, I'd like to suggest that probably teachers lost some of it as well. And that's true for everybody, because the lack of practice in the human interaction, even prior to the pandemic, with with the internet, and that replace a lot of in-person time with people, really makes people rustic. And with the complete shutdown of the pandemic, it even exacerbated quite a bit. I wanted to address the creativity part, which is, I think that you said before, Leslie, that one of the things that is so important for the union has been to really restore and remind teachers about their sense of agency. And I can imagine when the external force is so high on the teacher, your self-agency become actually an obstacle, because you're unable to actually function as it is demanded. And I would like to even suggest that when you don't have your self-agency in the center of how you are in your class, among one another, in the school in general, it stifles everything. It's very hard to be creative without a sense of agency, that I can do that, I can think freely, I can think out of the box, in addition to meeting the thing that I need to do for the class. And so I do feel that investing in the teacher's welfare is probably an important and probably a priority in order to restore that kind of sense of camaraderie that is missing at the moment.
Thank you, Hadar. All right, Katie, next question.
Another great question from the audience on a really practical level. What are some things teachers can do to support themselves?
I'll begin with the, you're going to start with that, David? Go ahead.
Well, I just want to know, I'll turn it over to you in a second, but just, this is the whole thing around there's a paradox about what can I do for myself, as opposed to what can we do for each other. And, it's like, Annie's going to probably talk about self-care, and there's such an emphasis in our culture about self-care. And I just want to throw in that there's self-care, and then there's caring together, the care of the community. But anyway, Annie, shoot.
Yes, yes. You know what I'm going to say. Self-care, you got to start there. You know how they say you put the mask on yourself first. You cannot give what you do not have. And so, I know teachers are like mothers, and many of people who are like caregivers, we're so used to just putting it out there and give and give and give and give. And somehow we get on the back burner and then we're last. But we have an opportunity to do the self-care part for sure. And part of self-care, I think Amy mentioned the thing about play. We underestimate the power of play, the interaction that we get with one another, that connection, that connectivity that we have with one another, and how powerful that is. And when we're able to do that, then we're able to give it to each other. And we have reserves then to share with our coworkers, and we have energy to bring to the process of teaching. But unless we do that first, then we have done ourselves a disservice. And do it not just like 10 minutes a day, exercise 30 minutes a week. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a daily practice throughout the day where you may take one conscious breath just in the moment when you're opening that door, where you're walking down to the cafeteria and you're consciously walking, feeling the earth beneath your feet, and when you're connecting with that child, eye on eye, and in that moment, you have that connective moment. Or when you touch that coworker on the shoulder, staying as far away as you can to keep from breathing on them, holding your breath, whatever you have to do that, but do it throughout the day. Don't wait for the 10 minutes, the 30 minutes. Do it as a part of your living, as a part of your breath.
Yeah, I want to follow
Good
up on.
advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And just Annie ran through a couple of things just very quickly that could be missed here. For me, I know that being reminded, in other words, there's ways I can be self-care that have nothing to do with my job. I go off and I take a drink of water, I rest, I meditate, I have, separate. But the most powerful part of dealing with burnout is becoming aware of the importance of your work.
Mm.
And because that is what gets eroded under stress, which eats away at your own being, which is that I hate being here. I hate the kids. The kids are just not helpful, and whatever. And I hate the administration. I hate the school district. I hate society. You get into this whole thing, as opposed to sitting down and getting to know your kids and hearing a little story from one of them about what they're going through and realizing, wow, I'm important to them. That I get light-footed with that. Or like you said, Annie, with your colleague, of actually bothering to reach out and not just find out from them, but also to share your own stuff with colleagues. Our culture teaches us in America not to ask for help. To ask for help means that you're weak, you're vulnerable, this kind of a thing. So people have forgotten how to ask for help. And you're not going to get help unless you ask for it and know how to ask for it. So I think ways particularly that address the core problem, which is, what is your relationship to the people in the building every day? The children, your colleagues, and your administration. And if you can improve those relationships, even through small acts of kindness to them and from them, it can make all the difference in the world.
I think it can be even more than small acts of kindness, though, David. Of course, I'm following Annie's advice because Annie knows and she knows about self-care. But I want to go back to what can I do for myself? What can we do for each other? And this is where unions really can step in. We know unions in the past 15 to 20 years, teachers unions specifically, have been made the bad guy and have been told that we're the obstructionists and that we are not helpful to students' education, that we're in it for ourselves. We're selfish people somehow, which, I think collectively we know is ridiculous framing. But I think teachers unions have a really important role to play in that. What can we do for each other? So it's not that we're fighting central office, but it's that we're doubling down to really provide the mechanisms at the building level to feel like teachers are supported. And not only that, some of the strongest teachers unions in the last 10 years have decided that they're going to bargain for the common good. So that in LA, in Chicago, in Boston, they've decided that what they're going to bring to the bargaining table is going to benefit the whole community, not just the teachers who show up in schools. So now teachers are even saying, what can we do for each other? Yeah, we are going to say, amount of a school nurse in every building, a librarian in every building, higher quality school lunches, recess, longer recess. We're going to put that in our contract negotiations because we know
mental health
is good for everybody.
Minneapolis teachers just struck, but one of their demands was greater mental health supports in the schools.
Exactly. Bargaining for the common good, right?
That's right.
So I think that's the direction we want to move in, is not what's in it for me. Of course, take care of yourself, but what can we do for each other? I love that build from the self-care to the community care. It's something I'm really enjoying and taking away from this conversation.
I think each other can also mean your students. Some of my best, most meaningful days have been when I've been honest with my kids and said, like, listen, I'm having a day. Can't even form words today. I'm going to need a little bit of support from you guys. And I think as women in particular, like Annie mentioned, we put ourselves on the back burner. We think we just have to be strong for everybody, but our kids are little warriors too, and they're all little pillars in our community. So looking to them for support too, and they have so much empathy within them, and that would be a great opportunity to stop and pause and do something silly together, or take a breath together, or practice self-care together. Teach them those skills and say, this is something I need to today. And just being honest, that really strengthens that relationship too when you're more vulnerable with your students.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Katie, can we get one more question in quick?
One last question. I've been thinking about leaving the teaching profession for a while now, and lately this feeling has grown stronger. Are there any key things in particular I should consider before making such a big decision?
I think, and I'll be real quick with this, in terms of making big decisions, you don't want to make it on a temporary situation. You making a big decision sometimes can be permanent and long-term. And right now we're in a temporary situation. And I would say, look at what you can do right here today to make small differences, and make the big decision later on down the road when you're more settled emotionally and better informed to make a decision. So you'll feel better about it. And I think you'll lessen regret when you allow yourself time to settle down and let the situation, I say, unfold completely, because we're still in the unfolding of what has happened to us. It's taken a while, it's taken right now a couple of years, but it's still unfolding. The dust has not settled. So let's hold on to those big decisions until the dust settles.
I think somebody wrote a poem about this, right, Annie?
Oh, yes, they did.
Did you want to share the poem that you have for us?
Oh, absolutely. Let me share this. This is a poem that was written in the 1800s by a man by the name of John Greenleaf Whittier. And it was during a time when the country was going through a very hard time, and definitely especially difficult for my people. And it's called Don't Quit. And it goes like this. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high and you want to smile, but you have to sigh, when care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't quit. Life is strange with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns, and many failures come about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up. Though the pace seems slow, you may succeed with another blow. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt. And you never can tell just how close you are. It may be near when it seems so far. So stick to the fight when your heart is hit. It's when things seem worse that you must not quit. For all the sad words of tongue and pen, the saddest of these is it might have been.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. Katie, if you put up the slide for us, join us next month for our next webinar, which is on expanding the concept of trauma-informed to include the students. That is not just simply informing and educating teachers and staff about trauma, but actually extending that to the students themselves and having them be collaborators with us. And that'll be on April 19th, same time, Tuesday from 4 to 5. And Hadar, would you like to remind people about our teacher support program?
Yeah, wow. What so well time to remind people that, that we do offer a teacher support program for teachers from all over the country who would like to take time to just kind of reflect on things that been on their mind and what these last 2 years evoked in them. And this is a great opportunity to do exactly what we hear each one of the panelists say, like take a moment to take the deep breath and understand what the experience is rather than react to it or maybe make decisions too prematurely. So if you're interested, please register in the link that has been provided.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for coming. We very much thank you for that. Hopefully it was helpful to you. And we'll see you next month. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everybody.